Title: The Chronicles of Eldoria, The Quest for the Eternal Flame. Prologue: The Whisper of Legends. In the heart of the ancient land of Eldoria, where the skies are painted with hues of gold and the earth resonates with the echoes of forgotten civilizations, there lay a legend. A legend so old that it had woven itself into the very fabric of time, whispered from generation to generation. It was the tale of the eternal flame, a mystical source of power that could grant immortality and control over the elements. Many had sought the eternal flame, but none had returned. The flame was said to be hidden in the Temple of Solara, a place lost to the sands of time, surrounded by treacherous landscapes, and guarded by ancient forces beyond comprehension. The temple was believed to be located somewhere deep within the cursed forest, a place where the living trees moved of their own accord and the very air could drive a person to madness. Only a few dared to venture into the cursed forest, and
please like the video to reach another person like you who wants to learn English, and subscribe and click on bell icon to do not miss the latest uploaded video notifications.
Even fewer returned with their sanity intact. The eternal flame remained an enigma, a dream for those who craved power and a nightmare for those who understood its true nature. Chapter 1: The Call of Adventure. In the small, remote village of Riverton, nestled between the towering peaks of the ironclad mountains, lived a young man named Cale. He was known throughout the village for his restless spirit and insatiable curiosity. Unlike the other villagers who were content with their simple lives, Cale dreamed of adventure, of discovering the mysteries that lay beyond the mountains, forests, and rivers that surrounded his home. Cale had grown up listening to the stories of Eldoria's great heroes and their quests. His grandfather, a retired knight, often told him tales of battles fought against the orc tribes of the north, of dragons that once soared above the highest peaks, and of the lost city of Ithra, where it was said the gods themselves once walked among mortals. But the story that captivated Cale the most was the legend of the eternal flame. It was a tale that had haunted his dreams since childhood, filling him with both dread and wonder. His grandfather had always warned him that some legends were better left alone, that the pursuit of power could lead to one's downfall. But Cale could not shake the feeling that the eternal flame was his destiny. On the eve of his 20th birthday, Cale stood on the edge of Riverton, gazing out at the vast world beyond. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of adventure. He knew that it was time to leave the safety of his village and embark on his journey. With nothing but his sword, a leather satchel filled with provisions, and the old map his grandfather had given him, Cale set out at dawn, determined to uncover the truth behind the legend of the eternal flame. Chapter 2: The Journey Begins. Cale's journey took him through the dense forests of Everwood, where the trees were so tall and thick that they blocked out the sun, casting the forest floor in perpetual twilight. The sounds of wildlife echoed around him, but Cale was undeterred. He followed the old map, which led him to an ancient, crumbling stone bridge that spanned a wide river. The bridge was covered in moss and vines, and it looked as if it could collapse at any moment. Despite the danger, Cale crossed the bridge and continued on his way. For days, he traveled through forests, across rivers, and over mountains, until he reached the edge of the cursed forest. The trees here were twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The air was thick with an unnatural fog that clung to Cale's skin, making it difficult to breathe. But Cale pressed on, determined to find the Temple of Solara and the eternal flame. As he ventured deeper into the forest, he began to feel a strange presence watching him. The trees seemed to shift and move in the corner of his vision, and he could hear faint whispers carried by the wind. But whenever he turned to look, there was nothing there. Cale's unease grew with each passing day, but he refused to turn back. He knew that he was getting closer to his goal. The old map showed that the Temple of Solara was at the heart of the cursed forest, and Cale was determined to reach it, no matter the cost. Chapter 3: The Guardian of the Forest. One night, as Cale set up camp near a small, murky pond, he heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. His hand instinctively went to the hilt of his sword as he scanned the darkness, trying to pinpoint the source of the noise. The rustling grew louder, and soon, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a creature unlike anything Cale had ever seen. It stood on two legs like a man, but its body was covered in thick, dark fur, and its face was more animal than human. Glowing yellow eyes stared at Kale from beneath a mane of tangled hair, and sharp claws extended from its hands. Kale drew his sword, ready to defend himself, but the creature made no move to attack. Instead, it spoke in a deep, gravelly voice that seemed to resonate with the very earth beneath their feet. "You are not the first to seek the eternal flame, but you may be the last," the creature said, its eyes narrowing. "The flame is not what you believe it to be. It is a force of great power, but also of great destruction. Those who have sought it before you have all perished, consumed by their own greed and ambition." Kale lowered his sword slightly, though he kept his guard up. "Who are you?" he asked. "And why do you care if I seek the flame?" "I am the guardian of the forest," the creature replied. "It is my duty to protect the Temple of Solara and the eternal flame from those who would misuse its power. But I can see that you are different from the others. You do not seek the flame for power, but for knowledge."
Kale hesitated, unsure of how to respond. It was true that he was driven by curiosity more than anything else, but he couldn't deny that the idea of possessing the flame's power had crossed his mind. "I seek the flame because I want to understand its true nature," Kale said finally. "I want to know why it has been hidden for so long and why so many have failed to find it." The guardian studied Kale for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Very well. I will not stop you from continuing your journey, but know this: the path ahead is fraught with danger, and the trials you will face will test you in ways you cannot imagine. If you wish to proceed, you must be prepared to face not only the dangers of the forest but also the darkness within yourself." Kale nodded, his resolve strengthening. "I am ready." The guardian stepped aside, allowing Kale to pass. "Follow the path of the moon," it said. "It will lead you to the temple. But beware, the closer you get, the more the forest will try to turn you back." With that, the guardian vanished into the shadows, leaving Kale alone once more. He sheathed his sword and took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges ahead. The path of the moon was faint, barely visible beneath the thick undergrowth, but Kale followed it, guided by the pale light of the moon overhead. Chapter 4: The Trials of the Temple. After days of navigating the treacherous terrain of the cursed forest, Kale finally reached the Temple of Solara. The temple was a massive structure, carved into the side of a towering cliff. Ancient symbols and runes covered its walls, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The entrance was guarded by two colossal stone statues, each depicting a warrior holding a flaming sword. As Kale approached the temple, the air around him seemed to grow colder, and a sense of foreboding settled over him. He knew that this was the moment of truth, the final test that would determine whether he was worthy of the eternal flame. He stepped inside the temple, and the door behind him slammed shut with a thunderous boom, trapping him inside. The interior of the temple was dark and silent, the only light coming from the faint glow of the runes on the walls. Kale could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on him, and for a moment, he considered turning back. But he knew that there was no going back now. He had come too far to give up. Kale made his way through the temple, his footsteps echoing off the stone floor. As he ventured deeper, he encountered a series of trials, each more difficult than the last. The first trial was one of strength. A massive stone door blocked his path, and he had to use all his might to push it open. The second trial was one of agility, a room filled with deadly traps that he had to navigate with precision and speed. The third trial was one of wisdom, a riddle etched into the wall that he had to solve to unlock the next door. But it was the fourth trial that nearly broke him. It was a trial of the mind, designed to prey on his deepest fears and doubts. The room was filled with illusions, each one more terrifying than the last. Kale saw visions of his family and friends, all of them accusing him of abandoning them, of being selfish and reckless. He saw himself failing, lost and alone in the darkness, with no way out. But Kale refused to give in to the fear. He knew that the illusions were just that, illusions, meant to test his resolve. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and focused on his goal. Slowly, the illusions began to fade, and the door to the next room opened. Kale stepped through the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He had passed the trials, but he knew that the hardest challenge was still to come. The final chamber of the temple lay ahead, and with it, the eternal flame. Chapter 5: The Eternal Flame. The final chamber was vast, with a high ceiling that seemed to stretch into infinity. At the center of the room was a large, circular platform, and in the middle of the platform stood the eternal flame. It was a pillar of fire, burning with a brilliant white light that illuminated the entire chamber. The flame seemed to dance and flicker, as if it had a life of its own. Kale approached the flame, his heart racing. He could feel its heat, but it was not the kind of heat that burned, it was warm, comforting, almost inviting. The flame seemed to beckon him closer, whispering to him in a language he couldn't understand. For a moment, Kale hesitated. He remembered the Guardian's warning, that the eternal flame was a force of great power, but also of great destruction. He knew that if he touched the flame, there would be no turning back. The power it held could either save or destroy him. But Kale also knew that this was what he had been searching for his entire life. The answers to the questions that had haunted him, the knowledge that had eluded him, all lay within the flame. He had come too far, faced too many dangers, to turn back now. Taking a deep breath, Kale reached out and touched the flame. The moment his hand made contact, the world around him seemed to explode in a brilliant flash of light. Kale felt a surge of energy coursing through his body, filling him with a warmth and power he had never known before. Visions flashed before his eyes, visions of the past, present, and future, of worlds beyond his own, of gods and monsters, of creation and destruction. Kale saw the history of Eldoria unfold before him, from the dawn of time to the present day. He saw the rise and fall of civilizations, the battles fought over the eternal flame, and the sacrifices made to protect it. He saw the true nature of the flame, a force of both creation and destruction, capable of bringing life or death, depending on how it was used. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the vision stopped. Kale found himself standing in the chamber once more, the flame still burning before him. But something had changed. The flame no longer seemed like a distant, unattainable dream. It was now a part of him, a part of his very soul. Kale knew that he had been granted the power of the eternal flame, but he also knew that with this power came great responsibility. The flame was not something to be used for personal gain or glory. It was a gift, meant to be used for the greater good, to protect and preserve the balance of the world. With this realization, Kale turned and left the chamber. The temple doors opened for him, and he stepped out into the cool night air. The cursed forest no longer seemed dark and foreboding, instead, it was bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight, peaceful and serene. Kale knew that his journey was far from over. There were still many mysteries to uncover, many challenges to face. But he was no longer afraid. He had the eternal flame within him, a guiding light that would lead him on the path of his destiny. Epilogue: The Flame's Legacy. Kale returned to Riverton a changed man. The villagers could see it in his eyes, in the way he carried himself. He no longer seemed like the restless, curious youth who had left in search of adventure. He was now a man of purpose, of wisdom and power. But Kale did not boast of his achievements or seek to use his newfound power for personal gain. Instead, he chose to live a quiet life, sharing the knowledge he had gained with those who sought it, and using the power of the eternal flame to help those in need. The legend of the eternal flame lived on, but it was no longer a tale of greed and ambition. It was now a story of hope, of sacrifice, and of the power of knowledge. Kale's name became synonymous with wisdom and humility, and his story was passed down through the generations, inspiring others to seek out their own paths, to find their own eternal flames. And so, the chronicles of Eldoria continued, with each new generation writing their own chapters in the never-ending story of the eternal flame.